Harwick County, Pennsylvania. October. The hills have gone the color of rust and copper, and the town below sits quiet in the early morning gray, the way small towns sit when they have decided collectively not to look at something. At the top of Kettle Rise, at the end of the road, where the pavement gives out a house, stands alone against the sky. 2 stories, a turret, 14 years of nobody. The windows that aren't boarded stare down like something that has been waiting a very long time. Inside, on the second floor, at the end of a hallway that ends too soon, a wall. Wallpaper newer than everything around it, a draft from nowhere, and behind it, hidden so carefully that 14 years passed without a single person asking why. A door. Someone sealed it on purpose. Someone oiled the hinges first. She is 18 years old. She has $62, and she is reaching for the knob. She was 18 years old. She had 2 black trash bags and $62, and on a gray Tuesday morning in October, the state of Pennsylvania handed her a folder, pointed at the door, and called it done. The caseworker's name was on a placard on the desk. Jarrell didn't bother reading it. She'd had 7 caseworkers in 6 years. They all had the same hands, the same way of not quite looking at you when they slid the paper across the desk, the same pause before they said the thing they were required to say. You're all set. All set. 2 bags, a folder with a list of shelters, $62 that had to last until she found work, which she had to find without an address, which she had to get without a phone, which she had to. She signed where they pointed. She took the folder. She walked out. October in Harwick County, Pennsylvania. The sky the color of old dishwater, the leaves already coming down off the maples in long wet sheets. The kind of morning that didn't care whether you had somewhere to be, the kind of morning that just kept going regardless. She had the tools at least. The canvas roll was tucked under her left arm, not in a bag, never in a bag. She'd carried it through 6 placements, 3 group homes, 2 emergency shelters, and 1 particularly bad winter in a house where the radiators only worked in the hallway. The canvas roll went where she went. Everything else was negotiable. Inside it, a block plane, 2 chisels, a card scraper, a marking gauge, a folding rule made of brass, worn smooth at the joints with the letters RH stamped into the metal near the hinge. She didn't know what RH stood for. She'd never asked. The man who gave it to her, the man who gave her all of it, had died when she was 15, and she had not had the chance to ask. And now she carried the question around with her the same way she carried the rule itself. Just because it was his, just because it was the kind of thing you keep. His name had been Hascomb, just Hascomb. She'd never called him anything else. He didn't offer a first name, and she didn't push for one, and that had suited both of them perfectly from the very first Saturday. She was 12 when the state placed her with him. A widower, a quiet man with a workshop behind his house that smelled of linseed oil and sawdust and the particular dry sweetness of old pine. He refinished furniture, chairs with broken rungs, dressers with water damage, tables that had been through a divorce or a flood or 30 years of somebody's Sunday dinner. He didn't talk much. That was fine. Jarrell hadn't talked much either by then. The first week he mostly ignored her. Not unkindly, just the way a man ignores a new tool he hasn't found the right job for yet. She watched him work. She watched the way he held a plain, low grip forward, pressed the whole body behind it, not just the arms. She watched the shavings come off in long, clean curls and fall to the floor like the wood was shedding something it didn't need anymore. The second week, he set a stool beside his workbench and didn't say anything. She sat on it. The third week, he handed her a scraper. "Feel that edge," he said. She ran her thumb along it. "Sharp, seriously sharp." "That's what you're aiming for," he said. "Not close, not pretty close, that." And that was more or less the extent of her formal education in the craft. Everything else was watching and doing and making mistakes and being shown quietly, without a word of reproach, the way it was supposed to go. Hanscom didn't believe in explaining things twice. He believed in doing them twice, or 10 times, or however many times it took, until your hands knew without your brain getting involved. She loved it immediately and completely. That was the part she never said out loud. Not then, not to anyone, because she'd learned by 12 that loving something completely was how you made yourself vulnerable to losing it. So she kept the love quiet. She kept it behind her sternum where it couldn't be seen. But she went to the workshop every day after school, and on weekends, she was there before Hanscom came out for breakfast. And when a drawer stuck, she was the one who took it off the runners and read the wood with her fingers the way he taught her. Light pressure, follow the grain, feel where it's swelled and where it's fine. The rule was already on the workbench when she arrived that third Saturday. Just sitting there beside the marking gauge, she picked it up without thinking, unfolded it. The brass was warm from the shop. The numbers were worn but still readable. "That was my father's," Hanscom said, without looking up from the chair he was stripping. She set it down carefully. "Keep it out," he said. "Use it. A rule needs to be used." She used it every day after that. She never once asked about the RH. He never once explained. And now she was 18 years old with $62 and the rule in a canvas roll under her arm, and the question she'd never asked had nowhere to go, except forward, which was the only direction she'd ever been able to afford. The library opened at 9. She was there at 5 past because the library was warm and it didn't charge admission, and nobody looked at you sideways if you sat at a table for 3 hours reading the job listings without buying anything. She'd been averaging about 4 hours a day there since Monday. Monday being the day she'd walked out of the county office with her folder and her bags and the particular lightness of a person who has nothing left to lose, which sounds freeing. It isn't. It feels like standing at the edge of a very high place, and the only thing between you and falling is the fact that you've gotten very, very good at standing still. The corkboard by the returns desk was where she found it, stuck between a flyer for a missing tabby cat and a notice about a Thursday quilting circle, one sheet of pale yellow paper, County of Harwich, tax delinquent property auction, Thursday 10 a.m. courthouse annex. A list of parcel numbers in small print ran down the page. She read it twice. Then she tucked it into the folder with the rest of her important papers. She wasn't planning to go. She went because Thursday was cold and the annex had heating, and she'd already read every job listing in the Tri-County area twice. But also, and she would not have admitted this to anyone she went, because she liked watching things change hands. She had owned almost nothing in her life, but there was something about a room where things were changing, hands that felt like possibility had a shape, and the shape might just once turn toward her. The annex smelled of burnt coffee and wet wool and the particular mildew of a building that had been built in 1967 and not substantially updated since. About 20 people sat on folding chairs, mostly men, mostly the comfortable boredom kind of men who had done this before and knew how it went. A few with laptops, a couple in good coats who were clearly there to turn someone else's disaster into their own investment. Jarrell sat in the back row with her bags against the wall and watched. The auctioneer worked through the lots quickly. A flooded duplex in the South Ward, a weed lot behind the gas station on Route 9, a storefront that had housed, according to the listing, 3 different failed restaurants in 11 years. The hands went up, the numbers went up, money moved through the air like weather. And then the auctioneer paused, not a long pause, a half beat, but she noticed it because she was the kind of person who noticed pauses. Parcel 41-9, he said, the house on Kettle Rise. Some of you know it. A few people in the front rows made a sound, not a laugh exactly, more like the sound a room makes when it remembers a shared joke. 2 stories turret on the northeast corner double lot, condition listed as poor, back taxes going on 14 years, sold as is where is, county takes no responsibility. Takes no responsibility is exactly right, a man near the front said, and that got a real laugh. A woman a few chairs over leaned to her neighbor. My granddaughter walked past there on a dare last Halloween, said she saw something in the upstairs window. Open at $15, the auctioneer said. He said it the way you announce something that's already failed, just to get through the formality of it. Jarrell did the arithmetic before she'd made any kind of decision. $15. That left her $47. A double lot. 2 stories and a turret. Whatever condition it was in, it had walls. It had a roof. It had been standing for 14 years of nobody wanting it, and it was still standing. She thought about the shelter on Millard Street, the one where you called by 4 and gave up the bed by 7 the next morning, the one where she'd spend every day starting from 0. She thought about Hascomb. Nothing's wrong with it that hands can't fix. Her arm went up, slow and steady, the same motion she used to lift a plane off the wood at the end of a stroke so it wouldn't tear the grain. Controlled, sure of itself. The auctioneer saw it, and his face did something, not pity, not quite, something more like the look a man gets when the universe does something he was not expecting and he hasn't decided yet whether it's funny. I have $15 from the young lady in the back. He scanned the room. Habit. Do I hear 20? Nobody heard 20. The man in the good coat turned fully around in his chair and looked at her, not with pity either, with something that was closer to annoyance, like she'd reached across him for something he'd already decided was his, even though he hadn't bothered to pick it up. Honey, the woman with the granddaughter said, not unkindly. She had kind eyes, actually. You don't want that house. Going once, the auctioneer said. Let her have the ghost, a man said, laughing. She can charge admission. Going twice. Jarrell kept her arm where it was. She kept her eyes on the front of the room, the way Hascomb used to stand when a customer questioned his price, unhurried, certain of the work in his own hands. The gavel came down. Sold. The house on Kettle Rise to the young lady in the back for $15. He shook his head a little as he wrote it. And the room did what rooms do. It moved on to the next lot, the next number, the next piece of somebody's abandoned life. She paid at the clerk's window in 1s and a 5. The clerk, young man, careful tie, the look of someone new enough to the job that paperwork still felt significant, slid a single sheet of paper across the counter, then a key on a loop of string, brass dark with age. He held the key a half-second longer than necessary, like it might be a mistake to let go. You know about that place, he said, not a question. I know it's mine now, Jorel said. She folded the deed into her jacket next to the folder with the shelter list she would no longer need, and she walked out before he could decide to warn her about anything. Kettle Rise ran east off the main drag, climbed past houses that got older and quieter and more tired the higher you went, and dead-ended where the pavement gave out into cracked concrete at the top of the hill. The house stood alone at the top. She'd walked 2 miles to get here. Her bags were heavy. The canvas roll was under her arm. The October sky had gone the color of pewter, low and close, the kind that meant business. 2 kids on bikes stopped at the corner, not following her exactly, just positioned in that particular way of children who are technically staying back, but spiritually right on top of the situation. "You're not going in there," the boy said. He was maybe 10. He said it with complete authority, the authority of someone who has arrived at an established fact. "I live here now," Jor-El said. She didn't stop walking. The 2 of them exchanged a look, the long, complicated look of children recalibrating. "Nobody lives there," the girl said, almost gently, the way you'd correct a grown-up who'd said something factually wrong without knowing it. Jor-El stopped at the gate, what was left of the gate. She looked at the house, and she understood, standing there, why the town had spent 14 years building stories around it. It was tall and narrow, the way Victorian houses are. Tall and narrow, not elegantly tall, but insistently tall. The kind of tall that says, "I was built to last longer than you." The turret rose on the northeast corner, 3 stories of it against the gray sky, the wood gone the color of old bone. Most of the windows were boarded, the ones that weren't stared down blank and dark. The porch sagged on one side where a support post had rotted through at the base. A wild rose had climbed the full length of the north wall and pulled a section of gutter loose, and the gutter hung at an angle like something that had been trying to leave for years and just hadn't quite managed it. Haunted house, obviously, immediately, every cliché of the thing, except she looked at it the way Hanscom had taught her to look at a damaged piece. Not at the damage, at the bones. She saw a roof, steep pitch, no visible sag from this angle, the slates still mostly in place. She saw walls, solid, brick foundation visible at the base where the siding had peeled back. Brick meant it wasn't moving. She saw the turret round and stubborn and still present after 14 years of nobody caring about it at all. Nothing wrong with it, she thought. Nothing wrong with it that hands can't fix. She went in. The front steps held her weight. Just. The key fought the lock-swollen wood-dry mechanism and then gave, and the door swung inward with a long groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the structure, like the house exhaling after holding its breath for 14 years. She stood in the doorway, gray light through the gaps in the boards, the smell of cold ash and dust, and something faintly underneath both of those things, something almost sweet like dry paper stored in a warm place. "Hello," she said. She felt foolish immediately. She said it anyway. Nothing answered. She went in. The entry hall was wide with plaster coming down in long sheets off the ceiling and a chandelier so furred with cobweb it looked like it was made of something organic. A staircase curved up to the second-floor banister, intact. She put her hand on it as she passed. Good solid oak under the grime. She could feel it through the years of neglect, the way the grain ran, the way the wood had been put together by someone who knew that staircases took weight and torque and the daily accumulated physics of 100 people going up and down. Somebody built this to last. She moved through slow, living room, dining room with a window that still had its original glass old wavy glass, the kind you couldn't buy anymore, the kind that made the world outside look like it was underwater, a bathroom that hadn't been touched in a decade, a back hallway that didn't make immediate sense. She stopped, looked at the back hallway more carefully. Along one wall ran a row of hooks, iron hooks painted black set at waist height, and below them a second row lower, set at the height of a child. Not one or two hooks, dozens, far more hooks than any single family would ever need, far more hooks than made sense for any ordinary purpose. She stood looking at them for a long time. Then she turned and looked at the door frame at the end of the hall, the frame between the hallway and what must have been a dining room, and she saw the marks. Pencil lines, horizontal, running up the full height of the frame from about 2 feet off the floor to well above her own head. Each line had a date beside it, a name, different hands, different pencils, different levels of pressure and care. Some of the names were easy to read. Some had faded almost to nothing. The dates went back. She leaned in, squinting in the gray light decades. The lowest lines were small. The highest were above her head. Not one child's growth chart. A dozen, 2 dozen, more. She stood in the half-dark back hallway of a house she'd bought for $15 and read the names on a door frame that shouldn't exist, and felt the first serious prickle of something she couldn't immediately name. Not fear, that wasn't it. Something more like standing on the edge of a story whose first page you've accidentally turned. The kitchen, when she found it, confirmed it. It was massive, the size of a restaurant kitchen, not a family one, a range built for cooking in quantity. A long work table scarred across the surface with decades of knives and hot pans and the weight of things being prepared. Shelves along the walls empty now, but built for more plates than any family owned. More cups, more everything. She stood in the middle of it with her 2 bags still in her hands, and something cold moved through her that wasn't cold at all actually. It was recognition. The bones of a thing she almost understood. Who had been here? What had this place been? Why was it empty? And why had the whole town looked the other way for 14 years while it fell apart at the top of the hill? She made her bed on the parlor floor, sleeping bag unrolled, jacket folded for a pillow, canvas tool roll within arm's reach because old habits and cold floors and the particular sleep of a person who has trained themselves not to need much. She woke twice in the night to sounds, the tick of old wood contracting in the cold, a loose shutter somewhere in the back of the house working against its frame, normal sounds, the grammar of an old building settling into itself. By the second time she woke, she'd stopped listening for threat and started just listening. There was something in it, the way the house talked to itself in the dark, like it had things to say that nobody had been around to hear. She was back on her feet before first light, dressed, hands already reaching for the plane before her brain had fully engaged. She walked the house in the pale early dark, running her palms over walls and floors and baseboards, doing what Hanscom had taught her to do with any piece before you started work. Read it first. Don't fix what you can't see. See what's actually wrong before you decide what to do about it. The plaster was a loss throughout most of the ground floor, but plaster was just plaster. The bones were good, the framing solid, the beams dry and true, no flecks under her weight in the places that mattered. The floors were wide plank sound beneath the grime. One bad spot over the back bedroom where the roof had a gap, and 14 years of rain had been working its way in, but it was one spot. One spot could be fixed. The stairs held her weight on every tread. The windows were mostly intact. The foundation where she could see it was honest brick, laid by someone who understood what brick was for. She stood at the top of the staircase and looked down the second-floor hallway, and then she walked it, slowly, counting the doors. 3 bedroom doors, 2 closed, 1 open, a linen closet. And then at the end of the hall, where the hall should have continued to reach the turret, a wall. She stopped, looked at it. The wallpaper everywhere else in the house was old, Victorian era, old, faded, and lifting at the seams, pale patterns of ivy and small birds going gray with age. But this stretch of wall, this section at the end of the hall in front of her, the paper was different, newer, still adhered tight. No lifting, no curling, no age damage. Paper hung over something. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt faint through the paper and whatever was beneath it, the cool draft of a space the rest of the house didn't know about. She knocked lightly, her knuckles against the surface. The sound came back wrong, hollow, not plaster on lath hollow, something different, deeper. She reached into the canvas roll and found the widest chisel, knelt down and worked it into the seam along the baseboard, careful the way you opened a stuck drawer, steady pressure, read the resistance, don't force. The paper peeled back, and underneath it was not plaster. Underneath it were boards, wide pine boards nailed flat across the wall in a vertical rectangle that reached from knee height to above her head, and around the edges of the rectangle she could see it now, the casing of a door frame, painted over, papered over, but there, a door, boarded shut, hidden, deliberately sealed, and then made to look like it had never existed. She sat back on her heels. The hall was very quiet. She could hear the loose shutter again somewhere at the back of the house. She could hear the wind in the wild rose along the north wall, the canes scraping against the siding. She could hear her own heartbeat, which had gone steady and loud, the way it went when something important was about to happen and the body knew it before the mind caught up. She looked at the boards, at the careful nailing, at the paper that had been hung to make you not look. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had known exactly what they were doing and had done it anyway, and had done it well enough that 14 years had passed and no one had noticed. Why? She fit the claw of the pry bar into the first board and set her weight against it and pulled. The board came free with a shriek of old nails that rang down the empty hall. She stopped, listened. Nothing but the shutter, nothing but the house. The second board came easier, the third easier still, the fourth, and she could see the door behind them now. A plain door, no lock, just a porcelain knob, gone yellow with age. She pulled the last board clear and let it fall, stood up, reached for the knob. It turned. The door swung inward. No sound. Someone had oiled these hinges before they sealed the door. Someone had wanted this to open smoothly whenever it finally opened, into darkness, into a smell of dust and old paper and very faint lavender. She reached into her jacket for the small flashlight she'd bought on the walk up the hill, $2 at the gas station on Millard, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark and found the first thing, a bed, small, child-sized, white iron frame made up neat, a quilt folded square at the foot, as if whoever slept there had stepped out that morning and would be back by dark. The quilt was gray with dust that filtered even through a sealed room, but the corners were sharp. Someone had cared about the corners. She stepped through the doorway and lifted the light higher. The room opened up around her. It was the missing section of the second floor, the section the hallway hadn't reached, wide and low under the slope of the roof, with the curved wall of the turret pushing out at the far end. At that far end, a tall window, painted black on the inside, carefully, completely blacked out. No light in, no light out. Someone had not wanted to be seen from the street. Someone had sat up here year after year with a lamp in a room the town didn't know existed. And the walls, floor to ceiling on both sides, shelves, hundreds of small boxes, shoebox size and smaller, each one labeled on the end in the same hand, careful, upright, economical letters. A first name, a year. She moved the light along the nearest row. Read the labels. A name and a year. Another name, another year. She moved the beam down to the lowest shelf. The earliest date she could find was in the bottom corner, 1954. She moved to the writing desk under the blacked-out window, set the flashlight down on it, pointing at the ceiling to spread the light, picked up the box closest to her hand, opened it. Inside, a school photograph of a boy maybe 8 years old, a gap in his front teeth, his hair combed with effort, a blue ribbon from a county fair, the kind for 4th place, a letter in a child's handwriting folded many times, a baby tooth in a fold of tissue paper, a church program with a date circled in pen. She set it down, picked up another, a girl's hair ribbon, a report card, a small photograph of an older woman and a child standing in a garden, another, a pressed leaf from what might have been a maple, a piece of drawing paper with a horse on it, careful and earnest, a birthday card signed by someone named only as B. She set them all down, and then she saw the book on the writing desk, thick, bound in black leather cracked along the spine, the only thing in the room without a layer of dust on it, because the dust that had settled had been wiped away more than once by a hand that came here often, a hand that touched this book and maybe nothing else. She sat down in the chair where someone had sat for years in this dark room in this house at the top of this hill. She opened the book to the first page. The ink had gone brown with age, but the writing was clear, careful, upright, the same hand as the labels on the boxes. At the top of the page, a title, The Children of This House, and below it, one line smaller, careful. Every one of them was somebody's. I just kept them until somebody remembered. She sat very still. The loose shutter worked against its frame somewhere far below. The wild rose scraped the north wall. She turned the page. The entries began. Short, a date, a name, sometimes only a first name, sometimes a first name and a question mark, where a last name should have been an age, a sentence or two. She read, a boy of 14 came in November, half froze, said his father put him out, stayed the winter. In the spring, I sent him to my cousin in Ohio with a coat and $40 and the address of a man who could use a strong back. He had a strong back. She turned the page. 2 brothers, 7 and 9, mother gone from fever, father drunk from before, stayed 4 years, both in school, both eating, both kind to each other in a way that surprised me at first and then didn't. Kindness is what happens when someone demonstrates it long enough. Both left when they were old enough to. One went north, the other stayed. I see him sometimes at the hardware store, and he always holds the door. She turned the page. A girl 17 who had not said a single word in the 8 months she stayed. Not one word, not to me, not to anyone. She ate and slept and helped in the kitchen and was present in the way that a person can be present and completely elsewhere at the same time. When she left, she shook my hand and that was all. And I think it was more than she'd given anyone in years, and I treated it as such. Below it, one sentence added later, different pen a hand that had grown older and shakier. She is safe now. That was the whole entry. Jorel set the book down on the desk. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. The darkness behind her eyelids was complete, and the house was very quiet, and she sat in the chair of the woman who had kept all of this, all of these children, all of these years, all of these small kept things, and she understood now what the hooks in the back hallway were for, what the oversized kitchen was for, what the growth chart on the door frame was for, and why the town had let this house fall apart for 14 years without once climbing the hill to ask what they'd lost. She turned back to the front of the book. She needed to read it from the beginning. She needed to read all of it. But first, she reached into her jacket pocket and closed her hand around the folding rule. The brass was cold. It warmed quickly. RH. She didn't know yet. She couldn't have known yet. But later, much later, when it all came clear, she would remember this moment. The way she'd closed her hand around the rule without knowing why. The way it had fit. The way the house had settled around her in the dark, like a room getting easier instead of harder. She opened the book again. She moved the flashlight closer, and she began to read. She read until the flashlight died. Then she sat in the dark and kept reading by feel, which wasn't reading at all, which was just sitting in the chair of a woman she'd never met in a room the town had forgotten existed, with her hands flat on a ledger full of children nobody had wanted. And she thought, I know this book. Not the book itself, not these pages, not these names, but the feeling of it, the shape of what it described, the particular silence of being 12 years old and unwanted and put somewhere temporary while the adults worked out what to do with you. She knew that silence from the inside. She sat with it until the gray light started coming through the gaps in the boarded window, and the room came back around her in pieces. The boxes on the shelves, the child's bed with the neat quilt, the blacked-out turret window. She stood up. Her back ached. Her feet were cold. She had $47 to her name and a condemned house and no electricity and a ledger full of 60 years of secrets, and somewhere in the town below there was a diner that probably made coffee. First things first, second-grade hardware sat on the end of an old industrial block near the freight rail spur, a low concrete building with a yard full of salvaged doors and clawfoot tubs and lumber that had gone silver in the weather. The sign was hand-painted, red letters, slight unevenness to the R that suggested it had been repainted once without quite matching the original. The bell over the door was a real bell, not electronic, an actual brass bell on an actual spring, the kind that had announced arrival since before the building was wired for electricity. Jarrell went in. It smelled of old iron and cut wood and machine oil and the specific dry warmth of a small space that had been heated by the same unit for 30 years. Shelves floor to ceiling, hardware bins along the east wall. In the back behind a long wooden counter, a woman looked up from a ledger, 60-something, broad-shouldered, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair that she wasn't doing anything particular about, forearms that said she moved her own stock, the kind of face that had stopped performing anything for anyone a long time ago and was considerably more interesting for it. Help you find something. Roofing cement, Jor-El said. Whatever's cheapest, and a pry bar if you have one. The woman set down her pen. That's a specific list. I have specific problems. Where at? She'd learned. The truth costs less than a lie in the long run. Less to track, less to maintain. The house on Kettle Rise, Jor-El said. I bought it yesterday. At the county auction. The shop went quiet. Not dramatically quiet. Just the particular quiet of a space where the person behind the counter has stopped moving and the ambient sounds have nowhere to go. The woman looked at her over the top of the reading glasses that were still pushed into her hair. "You bought the Dross house," she said. $15. The woman was still for another second, and then something moved across her face that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a cry, and was maybe what happens when both of those things try to arrive at the same time. "Lord," she said softly, "somebody finally did." She came out from behind the counter, square-shouldered, unhurried, the walk of someone who owned her floor. "Fetu," she said, and put out her hand. "Jor-El." Fetu looked at her, at the canvas roll under her arm, at the 2 bags that Jor-El had left just inside the door, at the boots that had walked a long way. She didn't ask any of the questions that a worse person would have asked. "Come on," she said. "Let's see what you actually need." She loaded the cart herself, roofing cement, a pry bar heavier than what Jor-El had asked for, better than what she'd have bought, a tarp for the roof gap, rolled and roped, a kerosene lamp that Fetu called a loaner and wrote down as a loaner, and intended Jor-El understood to never actually ask back for, a coil of good rope that appeared on the receipt as scrap. Jor-El watched the prices Fetu wrote down. They were not the prices on the tags. She started to say something. "You're keeping the Dross house standing," Fetu said, without looking up from the receipt pad. "As far as I'm concerned, that makes you a customer for life, and you can owe me the difference. I don't like owing. Nobody does. That's what makes it mean something." She tore off the receipt and handed it over. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that was not quite a question and not quite an answer. "What's the story on it?" Jor-El said. Because she had to ask somebody, because she'd been in that house and she'd seen the room and she'd read the first entries in that ledger, and she needed someone to put it in context. "Everybody acts like I bought something cursed." Fetu was quiet for a moment. She leaned against the end of the counter and folded her arms. "Depends who you ask," she said. "Ask the county. It's a tax liability they couldn't clear. Ask the kids, it's haunted. There's a story about a woman who walks the upstairs at night with a lamp." She paused. "Ask me. I'll give you the version that's actually true, which is that Opaline Dross lived in that house for 50-some years, and she never turned anyone away, and this town decided that was the strangest thing it had ever encountered." "Opaline Dross," Jor-El said. She had the name from the deed. She hadn't connected it to the ledger yet. Not completely. That was the previous owner. "That was her house," Fetu said. "Practically her whole life in that house. She took it on young and she kept it until the end." A pause. "Died 14 years back. Nobody went up after. Nobody wanted to deal with the estate because there wasn't any estate to speak of, and nobody wanted the house because the house was—" "The haunted house," Jor-El said. "The haunted house." Fetu's jaw tightened slightly. Easier to tell ghost stories than to ask after an old woman living alone at the top of a hill. Easier than climbing the hill. Jor-El thought about the room, the boxes, the ledger, the careful hand recording decades of children who'd passed through that house and gone out into the world and left small pieces of themselves behind in labeled cardboard boxes. "What did she do up there?" Jor-El said. "All those years. What was the house?" Fetu looked at her for a long moment. "That," she said, "is a longer story than your roof can wait for." Before Jor-El left, Fetu disappeared into the back and came out with a paper bag warm that turned out to hold half a meatloaf sandwich and an apple and 2 boiled eggs wrapped in a dish towel. She put it in the cart without ceremony. Jor-El returned the dish towel the next morning folded. Fetu took it without comment. That was its own language. Also, before Jor-El left, Fetu made one phone call. "A woman named Parveen Osei," she said. Small office, good instincts. Hated it when people with money used paperwork to bully people without it. Jarrell should call her Fetu said before anything else happened with the county. Jarrell wrote the number on her palm and kept her hand flat and dry for 2 miles uphill. The roof took most of the afternoon. Cold work. The pitch was steep and the tarp wanted to go everywhere except where she needed it, and the roofing cement froze on the trowel twice and had to be warmed in her jacket before she could work it properly. Her hands went numb somewhere around the second hour. She kept going. When she came down the ladder, the cone of gray sky that had been visible through the back bedroom ceiling was gone. The house was for the first time in 14 years dry. She stood in the yard and looked up at her work. Just a tarp and cement and rope. Not elegant, not permanent, but done. And a done, imperfect thing was worth more than a perfect thing that was still just an idea. She went back inside and took the lamp to the turret room. She needed to read the ledger properly, with light, from the beginning. It took her 2 full days. She read in the turret room with the lamp. She broke for water and crackers and the food from Fetu's bag. She read the ledger in order from 1954 forward. Short entries mostly, some only a line, some a paragraph, all in the same hand, careful, spare, nothing wasted. Children dropped at the door in the night with notes. The notes all said the same thing in different handwriting. Please, just for a while. And Opaline had kept them, just for a while, or 4 months, or 2 years, or however long it took for somewhere better to appear, or for the child to grow old enough to make their own somewhere. She'd fed them and gotten them into school and taught them how to be in a kitchen and written down their names in a ledger she kept in a room she'd sealed away, because she understood with the practical clarity of someone who'd been doing this since 1954 that an unlicensed house full of children was a house that would be shut down the moment the right official heard about it. So she'd kept the window painted black. She'd kept the records in a room behind a wall. And she'd kept going. For 60 years, Jorel read until she found the entry that stopped her. It was about 2/3 through the ledger. Winter of 1973. The ink was the same, but the date was clear. January. A girl arrived. Morella, 17. She came in the dark, sent quietly by a pastor in a county 2 hours south who knew Opaline's name through a network of people who kept such names for exactly such occasions. She was 8 months along, frightened past the point of speaking. She ate, she slept, she helped in the kitchen without being asked. In April, she had the baby in the back bedroom. A boy. The doctor who came never charged Opaline a dime, same as always. Morella's family took her home once the baby was placed. She married within the year. She never spoke of the time she'd been away. And then a note added later, in the same hand but older, shakier, added years after her boy grew up, right here in Driswell. He builds things. Half this county has his name on it. Jarrell read that line 3 times. Her boy grew up right here in Driswell. He builds things. Half this county has his name on it. She sat very still in the turret room with the ledger open in her lap, and she thought about a man in a good wool coat who had stood at the bottom of her porch steps and told her she didn't understand her own position. She thought about the card she'd left on the porch rail in the rain. Caston Vrell, developer, Vrell Construction Group, with the little trademark logo of a foundation block and the motto, Building Harwick Forward. Building Harwick Forward. Half this county has his name on it. She closed the ledger. She sat with what she was holding, because she was holding something real now, something that had weight, something that if she chose she could use. She could walk into Castanvrel's office and lay this page on his desk and watch him understand that she knew exactly where he took his first breath, that his mother had spent a winter as a 17-year-old girl in the house he was trying to tear down, that the only record of that year, the year she'd never spoken about for the rest of her life, was sitting right here in Jarrell's two hands. She could make him stop. She sat with that. She sat with it for a long time. And then she kept reading. Near the end of the second day, near the back of the ledger, she found the entry she wasn't looking for. 1959. A boy, 12 years old, the name Rufford, the most capable pair of hands I have ever seen on a child that age, Opaline had written. He could look at a broken thing and understand it immediately, the way some people understand music or mathematics. Just knew. He stayed one winter, he left in the spring. And then lower on the page, added in an older hand, he came back once, years later. An old man by then, sat at this table, didn't say much, that was always his way, but he took a folding rule out of his coat. His father's, he said, the RH stood for his grandfather, who'd brought it from somewhere east, and he set it on the table. Give it to whoever comes next, he said. Give it to whoever needs steady hands. Jarrell looked down at the canvas roll on the floor beside her. The rule, RH. She sat very still. Rufford Hascombe. He had been here, in this room, in this chair. He had come back at the end of his life and sat at this desk and left the one thing he had from his grandfather in the hands of an old woman who kept things for people and trusted that the right person would come. And then he had died, and the rule had passed to the girl he'd been teaching, and she had carried it through 6 placements without knowing why, and it had led her here. Give it to whoever needs steady hands. She held the rule in her palm. The brass warmed quickly. She stood up. She still had the page about Morella and the page about Vrel, and she had still not decided what to do with it. But she picked up the ledger and the lamp and the canvas roll, and she carried them downstairs because some things were too important to leave alone in the dark. The notice was on the gate the next morning. County of Harwich, letterhead, official seal, notice of unsafe structure, and order to show cause. A hearing date 11 days out. Building inspector would recommend repair or demolition. Owner of record, and there was her name spelled correctly, which somehow made it feel more real, was required to appear. She read it twice, folded it into her jacket next to the deed. Then she went to find Fetu. 11 days, Fetu said. 11 days. They were in the back of the shop. 2 mugs of coffee on the work table, both of them standing, the way people stand when they're thinking faster than they want to sit down for. He moved fast, Fetu said. Vrel's been wanting that lot for 3 years. He couldn't get the county to move on it because the tax situation was tied up in probate, and nobody wanted to be the one who sent a crew up that hill. She wrapped both hands around her mug. But you own it now. You're 18 and you have no money and no lawyer, and he has 3 years of paperwork already filed. Tell me what I don't know, Jorel said. He's got the building inspector in his pocket. Not corrupt exactly, just aligned. They went to the same church for 20 years. Of course they did. And the county code violations are real. They're not fabricated. That house has open violations going back to when Opaline was still alive and too old to manage the stairs. So legally, he's not wrong. He's just using real things for wrong reasons. That's usually how it works. Fetu set down her mug. What do you have? I have a ledger, Jorel said, and I have $47. Fetu was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was doing something. I have lived in this town for 60 years, she said finally. And I have some favors I have never called in. She looked at Jarrell directly. Give me a day. I'll come find you. Why? Jarrell said. You met me less than a week ago. Fetu picked up her mug again, took a slow sip, set it down. I'm not doing it for you, she said. I'm doing it for a woman I owe something to, and right now, you're the closest thing to her that's walked into this town in 14 years. She picked up her pen. Go home, she said. Keep the lamp lit. I'll come when I have something. Jarrell went home. She worked on the front door, which had swollen in its frame across a decade of wet winters and dragged so badly it wouldn't latch. She took it off its hinges, laid it across 2 sawhorses she'd made from porch rubble, and unrolled the canvas. The block plane fit her hand the way it always had. She set the iron fine and went to work down the swollen edge, and the shavings came off in long, clean curls that smelled of a 100-year-old door, and the rhythm of it emptied her head of everything that wasn't the wood. She'd been at it maybe an hour when she realized she was being watched. 2 kids, different ones from before, a boy about 8 and a girl a bit younger, standing at the broken gate with their bikes watching with the concentrated attention of children observing something they don't fully understand but find genuinely interesting. What are you doing? The boy said, making the door smaller. Why? Because the house got bigger and the door didn't know yet. The girl considered this with great seriousness. How do you do that? She said. Make the door smaller. Jarrell held up the plane. The boy took an involuntary step closer, which meant the girl did too, which was how children worked. You take off a little bit at a time, Joro said, until it's right here. She ran the plane down the edge again and held out a long, curled shaving. That smells like 100 years ago. The boy took it, held it to his nose. His whole face changed. Whoa. They stayed 20 minutes. She answered every question straight. By the time they pedaled off down the hill, they had forgotten entirely and completely to be afraid of the house at the top of it. Small thing, but small things were the only kind she'd ever had to give. The door latched cleanly. She was testing it open, closed the satisfying click of the mechanism catching when she heard the car. Big engine. New. It came up kettle rise without hesitating, which meant whoever was driving had been here before or had looked it up and decided to come anyway. It parked outside the broken gate. The door opened. Caston Vrell was wearing a different coat than last time. Still good wool, still never seen a job site. He came up the walk looking at the house with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. Nice work on the door, he said. She didn't answer that. I heard about the notice, he said. I want to be straightforward with you. I filed the complaint a while ago. I didn't know someone would buy the property before the county acted on it. He spread his hands, small open gesture. Reasonable man. I'm not your enemy. You want my house, Jor-El said. I want the lot. I want to build something useful on it. Senior housing, a small clinic, things the town actually needs. He looked at the house again. This structure is not safe, Jor-El. That's not a tactic. That's true. I know that. Then you know you can't fix it. Not on your own, not at your age, not with what you have. She looked at him. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a card, held it out. Come to my office tomorrow morning, he said. I'll have a real number for you, not the 9,000 I mentioned before, a real number. You walk away with money in your pocket instead of a condemnation order and 11 days of stress. He set the card on the porch rail when she didn't take it. It's the sensible choice. He walked back to his car, got in, pulled away. She watched the car go down the hill until it disappeared around the bend. Then she looked at the white card on the porch rail. She left it there. And she also left the question alone, the question about Marella and the page in the ledger and what she was going to do with it, because she had learned that forcing a decision before you were ready to make it only produced decisions you couldn't stand behind. The cassette machine needed batteries. Of course it did. She went back down the hill the next morning for batteries and found Fetu in the yard, moving a clawfoot tub with a dolly and absolutely not needing help, but accepting it anyway, because two people move a clawfoot tub faster than one, and Fetu was practical above all other things. "I need to ask you something," Jarell said when the tub was where it was going. Fetu straightened, looked at her. "Are you in the ledger?" The yard was very quiet. A crow somewhere on the freight rail, the distant sound of a truck on Route 9. Fetu looked at her for a long moment, and then she looked away at the stacked lumber against the fence, at the clawfoot tub they just moved, at the gray October sky. 1978, she said. Just that. 2 numbers, a year. Jarell waited. I was 14, came through a placement in Philadelphia. My mother's family was in Samoa. My father was from here, from Harwick County, but he was gone by then, and nobody on his side wanted the situation. She paused. 2 years I was there, in that house. Another pause. I've owned this shop for 22 years. I've lived 4 blocks from the post office my whole adult life, and I have never said this to anyone, not my husband, not my kids. Why not? Because in 1978, being a child that nobody wanted was a thing you were supposed to be ashamed of. Her voice was very even, and I was young enough to believe that. She kept records, Jarell said. There are boxes for everybody who was there. Each one has a name and a year on it. Fetu turned and looked at her, really looked. She kept a box, Jarell said. For you. Fetu put her hand on top of the clawfoot tub, not for support, just to have something solid under her palm. All this time, she said, not a question, not to Jarell, to no one in particular, to the yard, to the gray sky, to 14 years of a house going dark at the top of a hill while the town walked past. All this time, she said again, and that was all. The batteries went in, the cassette machine clicked, Jarell pressed play on the first tape. The voice that came out was old, not frail exactly. There was no apology in it, but worn, the way wood gets worn when many hands have touched it over many years. A woman's voice, speaking slowly, not performing slowness, just slow the way certain people slow down when they've reached the point in their life where they know exactly how much they mean every word. I am Opaline Dross. I have lived in this house since 1953. I am recording this because my hands have gotten too bad for writing, and there are things left to say that the ledger doesn't have room for. Pause. If you found this room, the house found you. I know how that sounds. I stopped worrying about how it sounds a long time ago. The house has always found the ones it needed. I don't know how. I stopped asking. Pause. What I want to say, what I have never been able to write down, is that the children who came through here were not charity cases. They were not problems I solved. They were people, and every single one of them arrived here believing, for very understandable reasons, that they were less than that they were too much trouble, that the world had weighed them and found them wanting. Pause. Longer. It had not. The world was simply wrong, the way the world is often wrong about things it doesn't understand and doesn't bother to examine. Jarell sat very still on the floor of the turret room with the lamp beside her and the tape player in her lap. I kept the window lit, the voice continued, because I thought if there was a child somewhere out there who was lost and couldn't see any light, maybe the light would pull them up the hill. Maybe just knowing there was a lit window somewhere in the dark was enough to keep walking. The tape ran. I don't know if it worked. I kept it lit anyway. And then after another pause, the voice changed slightly. Not softer, more deliberate. "There is a boy," the voice said. Or there was. "He's a man now. I don't know how old this tape will be when someone hears it, but there is a man in this town who doesn't know that he took his first breath in the back bedroom of this house. His mother was 17 and alone and frightened, and someone brought her to me, and she had him here in April, and she went home and she lived her life, and I think she tried very hard to live a good one. I kept track of her the way I kept track of all of them." Jarrell's hands went still on the tape player. "He builds things," the voice said. "I see his name on buildings sometimes when I could still go to town. He builds things the way a person builds things when they are trying to make up for something they don't understand the shape of. I recognize it. I have seen it before." Pause. "He doesn't know. He may never know. But I wrote it in the ledger, and I'm saying it now on this tape, because the truth about where a person comes from is not a secret that belongs to the living. It belongs to the person themselves. And if the day ever comes when he needs to know, or when someone needs to give it back to him, it will be here." The tape ran a little longer. Soft hiss of nothing. Then the second tape. Harder to listen to. Less narrative. More private. The voice of someone recording in the small hours when the formal distance between a person and what they actually felt had gone thin. Opaline talked about the children she'd never been able to help enough, the ones who'd left too soon, the ones she'd lost track of, the ones she worried about still, and then Rufford. "He came in 1959, the voice said, 12 years old, the most capable pair of hands I have ever seen on a child that age. He could look at a broken thing and understand it immediately, the way some people understand music or mathematics, just knew." Pause. "He stayed one winter. He left in the spring." Pause. "He came back once, years later. An old man by then, sat at this table, a sound that might have been a dry laugh. Didn't say much. That was always his way. But he took a folding rule out of his coat. His father's, he said the RH stood for his grandfather, who'd brought it from somewhere east, and he set it on the table and said, 'Give it to whoever comes next. Give it to whoever needs steady hands.'" Jarrell looked down at the canvas roll on the floor beside her. "I kept it in his box," the voice said, "but I think he meant it to go on. I think he knew that a tool like that doesn't belong in a box. It belongs in a hand." The tape ran. "Give it to whoever comes next," the voice said again, almost to itself. "Give it to whoever needs steady hands." The hiss of tape, the end of the reel. Jarrell sat on the floor of the turret room in the house she'd bought for $15 and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and just breathed. Because Hanscom had been here. Hanscom, who had never told her his first name. Hanscom, who had put a tool in her hand at age 12 and shown her without a single word of instruction. She could actually remember afterward how to see the bones of a broken thing. Hanscom, who had died quietly of his heart and left her the tools and 3 more years of being moved from place to place until Tuesday. He had been here. He had sat in this chair. He had left the rule. For her. Without knowing it was for her, without knowing she existed. But it had come to her through his hands and the canvas roll and 6 foster placements and a county auction on a cold Thursday morning, and it had led her here. And the house had been waiting, and Opaline had been waiting in the only way the dead can wait, which is by leaving things behind. Give it to whoever needs steady hands. She picked up the rule from the canvas roll, held it. R.H. Rufford, her Hascombe, the man who had taught her without knowing he was completing a circuit that had started in this very room. She stood up slowly, and the decision about Marella and Vrel had made itself somewhere in the dark while she wasn't looking. Not a weapon, a gift, if it could be given right. Parveen Ose called at 11:17 at night. Jarrell knew it was important because Parveen did not call at 11:17 at night for anything that could wait until morning. Parveen was the kind of lawyer who sent emails at 11:17 and called at 9:15 after she had already organized her thoughts into numbered points. So when the phone rang, borrowed phone, Fitu's backup, a brick of a thing from 2019 that still worked perfectly, and that was exactly the kind of phone Fitu would own. Jarrell answered it on the first ring. He filed for expedited condemnation, Parveen said. No preamble, because there wasn't time for preamble. The standard hearing was 11 days. He filed a supplemental declaration this afternoon claiming imminent structural danger to neighboring properties. The county accepted it. A pause. The hearing is tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. You have, she calculated aloud, 9 hours and 43 minutes. Jarrell sat down on the parlor floor. Okay, she said. Okay. Parveen's voice had an edge in it. Not panic, the opposite of panic. The flat sharpness of someone who had been angry for a while and had learned to turn anger into fuel. It's not okay. It's a procedural manipulation, and I'm going to make sure that is on the record before anyone says a single word about your roof. But you need to be there at 9, and you need to bring whatever you have. I have the ledger. Bring it. And the tapes. A pause. What tapes? Opaline left cassette tapes. 3 of them. She recorded. Jarrell stopped. Started again. She recorded things she couldn't write down. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that was doing something. Bring those 2, Parveen said. Bring everything. And Jarrell. Another pause. Shorter. Try to sleep. She hung up. Jarrell looked at the phone in her hand. Try to sleep. Sure. Absolutely. She would just close her eyes and not think about the fact that she had 9 hours and 43 minutes, 9 hours and 41 minutes, now before someone decided whether to tear down the only thing she had ever owned. She did not sleep. She sat with the ledger instead, not reading, just sitting with it, letting the weight of it be what it was. All those names, all those years, came angry, left kind, good with numbers and wouldn't let anyone know it. Afraid of the dark for the first month, not after. She sat with all of it until the dark started going gray at the edges of the boarded windows. Then she stood up, put the ledger in the canvas bag, and copied out the page about Marella onto a piece of paper from Fitu's counter by lamplight, careful and slow, because the ledger needed to stay whole. She had a decision made, and the night had become 4 hours. The hearing was not in the county room. That was the first thing. Parveen had called ahead and confirmed it. The county building was closed for a water main repair, and the session had been moved to Driswell Community Church on the corner of Ash and Fifth, which was a large limestone building that had been in continuous use since 1889 and had hosted in its time-town meetings and memorial services and one extremely contentious school board election that people still talked about. Jarrell found out about this via a handwritten note on the original county building door, which she found after walking 20 minutes in the wrong direction, which meant she arrived at the church with 6 minutes to spare and a very specific kind of fury that had nowhere useful to go, except the church was full, not packed, not standing room, but full in the way that meant something. 40 people, maybe 50, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front where the building inspector sat with his paperwork and Caston Vrell sat with his and a man in a gray suit who had the particular stillness of someone being paid by the hour to be still, and Parveen at a smaller table to the side, already standing, already looking like she had been awake for exactly as long as Jarrell had and had spent the time more productively. Jarrell walked to the front, sat down. Vrell caught her eye and gave her a small nod, almost kind, the nod of a man who had already decided how this was going to go and was prepared to be gracious about it. She did not nod back. The inspector spoke first. He was a careful man, a man who lived inside procedure the way some people lived inside houses, because procedure had walls and a roof, and you knew where things were. He read the violations, long list, flat voice, failing porch structure, roof damage, compromise, load-bearing elements, open electrical, no certificate of occupancy. No, it went on. All of it true. She knew it was true. She'd walked those floors. Then Vrell stood, and he was good at this. She had known he would be good at this. He had the voice of someone who had learned somewhere along the way that if you sounded reasonable, you could say almost anything. "Nobody is the villain here," he said. "This house is dangerous. It has been dangerous for years. I want to be clear that what I'm proposing is not an act of aggression. It is an act of care for this young woman, for this neighborhood, for this town." He looked at Jarrell with something on his face that was almost sympathy. She bought this property in good faith. She didn't know what she was taking on. "My company is prepared to cover demolition costs, clear the back taxes, and offer a fair purchase price on top of that." She walks away with money she can actually use. That is not cruelty. That is the realistic option. The inspector nodded. People in the rows nodded. It sounded like sense. It sounded like the only ending a story like this could have. The inspector looked at Jarrell. "Ms. Day, you're the owner of record. Do you have anything to say?" She stood up. Her legs were fine. She had expected them to shake and they didn't, which was something, which was maybe the 18 years of practice standing in rooms where the decision had already been made and she was there only as a formality, except she wasn't a formality this time. "I do," she said. She put the ledger on the table in front of her. "Mr. Vrell says I didn't know what I was taking on," she said. "He's partly right. I didn't know about the electrical. I didn't know about the load-bearing issue on the east side." She looked at the room, 40-some faces looking back. "But I know what the house is, what it actually is, and I don't think anyone in this room does, including Mr. Vrell." She opened the ledger. This was sealed in a room nobody knew was there, she said, hidden behind a section of wall on the second floor. "I found it less than 2 weeks ago." She looked down at the page. "It's a record, 60 years of it, kept by a woman named Opaline Dross." She read, not dramatically. That was important, not performing grief or significance or weight, just reading, the way you read a fact. "A boy of 14 came in November, half frozen, said his father put him out, stayed the winter, left in the spring with a coat and $40 and an address." Silence in the room. Twin brothers 7 and 9, mother gone from fever, father unable, stayed 4 years, both in school, both eating. More silence. The particular silence of people who have stopped shuffling their papers. A girl of 17 who never said a single word in 8 months. She is safe now. She closed the ledger. Opaline Dross took in this town's children for 60 years, Jorel said. The ones the county couldn't place, the ones who aged out with nothing, the way I aged out with nothing less than 2 weeks ago. She never told anyone because if she had, they would have shut her down. She never asked for anything. She never got credit. You told ghost stories about her. She looked at the room. You can vote to tear that house down, but you should know what you're voting to tear down before you do. The room was very quiet, and then in the fourth row a woman stood up, silver-haired, good coat that had been good for a long time, the kind of straight-back stillness that belonged to someone who had decided something and was done deliberating. I lived in that house, she said. Her voice was clear, carrying. 1966. I was 17. I would be dead or something close enough to dead that it doesn't matter if Opaline Dross had not opened that door. She looked around the room slowly. I went to nursing school. I worked at the Harwick County Hospital for 31 years. I took care of 3 people in this room specifically. She paused. I am not a ghost story. I am right here. She sat down. Silence. And then in the back near the door a man stood up. 60s. Solid, work-worn hands. 1971, he said. I was 12. She fed me for 14 months and never once asked me what I'd done to deserve being where I was, which was nothing. I hadn't done anything. I was just unlucky, and she knew the difference. He sat down hard. I named my daughter after her, never told the girl why. Figured the story made it sound like I came from nothing. He paused. I came from that house. That is not nothing. A woman near the window stood. A year. A man by the side door. A year. One after another. Not fast. Not performed. The way people stand up when they have been carrying something a long time, and the weight has finally become less than the cost of staying seated. The years ran back through the room. 1988, 1974, 1969, 1962. The silver-haired woman who had stood first was crying and not hiding it. The inspector had set down his pen. Caston Vrell had turned in his chair. He was watching the room, watching the years accumulate, watching the people stand, and his face, the careful, warm, reasonable face, had gone still in a way that wasn't stillness. It was the face of a man who has just understood that the room he walked into is not the room he thought it was. Jorel watched him. She picked up the canvas bag from the floor. Mr. Vrell, she said. She said it quietly enough that only he heard. He looked at her. I need to speak with you in the hall. The hall of Driswell Community Church smelled of old wood and candle wax, and the particular cold that stone buildings hold even in October. Vrell followed her out. The gray suit man started to come to, and Vrell stopped him with a gesture. Just a hand. Stay. They stood in the hall, just the two of them. Through the heavy door behind them, muffled, they could hear another voice standing. Another year. Jorel reached into the canvas bag and took out the single sheet of paper she'd copied by lamplight at 4 a.m. She held it out. Vrell looked at it, then at her. What is this? Read it. He took it and read. She watched his eyes move across the page, fast first, then slow, then stopped, then back to the beginning, slow again, all the way through. She had imagined this moment, had imagined what his face would do and how she would feel watching it. She had imagined several versions. None of them were this, because what happened to Caston Vrell's face was not drama. It was not the collapse of a powerful man. It was the opposite of powerful. It was the face of a person who has just been handed something they have been looking for their entire life, without knowing they were looking for it, and who does not yet know what to do with their hands. "Where did you get this?" he said. His voice had changed. "She wrote it," Jorel said, "in the ledger and on the tape. She kept track of everyone who passed through that house, the ones who stayed and the ones who just passed through. She wrote it down in case the day ever came that somebody needed to give it back to them." He read it again. "Mirella," he said, "that's your mother's name. She had—" He stopped, started again. "There was a year before she met my father, a year she would never discuss. I asked her once when I was maybe 30, and she left the room, just left the room." He was still looking at the paper, not at Jorel, at the paper. "I thought it was something shameful. I thought she was ashamed of me somehow, that whatever happened in that year—" "She was 17, Jorel said, "and alone, and someone opened a door." He pressed his knuckles against his mouth. She gave him a moment. She had learned from 18 years in rooms where things were decided that the most powerful thing you could sometimes do was give someone a moment. "She spent a winter here," Jorel said, "in that house, in the back bedroom. Opaline kept her, fed her, sat with her, called the doctor who never charged. And when your mother's family came for her, she went. She lived her life, and Opaline wrote it down." Jorel looked at him. "Not to use against her, not against you, just to keep it, so it wasn't lost." He lowered his hand. He looked at her. And in his eyes was something she had not expected and did not have a name for on first contact, but which she understood because she had felt it herself in the turret room in the small hours of the morning with a tape player in her lap. The feeling of being handed something that was yours all along. "Why are you giving me this?" he said. "An hour ago I was trying to take your house, because it's true whether I'm angry at you or not," Jorel said, "and because somebody once taught me that a thing isn't ruined just because it's been left." She paused. "Not a door, not a house, not a year of your mother's life that nobody ever let her talk about." Vrel looked down at the paper in his hands. He folded it, slowly, along the same crease it had come folded in, the careful fold of someone handling something that has weight. "I built half this county," he said. "I built things because I thought—" He stopped, tried again. "I thought I was making up for something. I never knew what. I just always felt like there was a debt I owed for reasons I couldn't explain." "You don't owe a debt," Jorel said. "Your mother was a 17-year-old girl who needed a door. Opaline opened it. That's the whole story." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother had a year she never named," he said. "Her whole life she carried it." He looked at the folded page. "You just handed it back to her." The door to the main hall opened, and Parveen leaned through with the expression of someone who had been professional for exactly as long as she could manage. "They're ready to vote," she said. Vrel looked at her, then at Jorel, then back at the page in his hands. He straightened his jacket, and he walked back into the room. He withdrew the condemnation filing. He set it standing facing the room. No preamble, no warmth, just the flat, certain voice of a man who has made a decision and does not require anyone's agreement. He said his company would make available its crews and its materials at cost or below to whoever was leading the restoration of the house on Kettle Rise. No ownership stake, no naming rights, no conditions. He said the back taxes, 4,200 and change, would be settled by his office by end of week. He did not explain any of it. He sat down. The inspector looked at his papers for a long moment, then at the room which was still half full of standing people and years. He recommended a 12-month repair timeline. It passed without a dissenting vote. There was no celebrating. Not immediately. The room just exhaled. 40 people breathing out at once, the sound of a held thing released. Fatu found Jarell outside on the church steps afterward and gripped her by both shoulders for a long second without saying anything, which was more than enough. The silver-haired woman, her name was Dorcas, and she had introduced herself properly on the church steps with a handshake that was stronger than it looked, came out and took Jarell's hand in both of hers and held it. "Don't let that window go dark again," she said. "Whatever you have to do." "I won't," Jarell said. The man who had said 1971 came out and stood near her for a moment. She never knew what happened to most of us. That was the hardest part for her, I think, not knowing. "She kept the boxes," Jarell said. "I know." He looked at the street. "I'd like to, if it's all right, I'd like to come see mine sometime." "Come whenever you want," Jarell said. "The door's going to be open." That afternoon, Vrel came up the hill, alone, old clothes, no coat. The first time she'd seen him without the armor of presentation. He stood at the broken gate for a while before he came through it. She watched him from the porch, the way she'd watched the kids on bikes that first day, not moving, just giving him the space to do what he needed to do. "Can I see it?" he said. The room. She took him up. He stopped in the doorway, stood there looking at the walls of boxes, the child's bed, the writing desk, the window where the black paint had been washed away and the gray sky showed through clean. "Opaline sat in this room," he said, "for years. Every night near the end, he moved to the shelves, read the labels, first name year, running back through decades. He ran his finger along a row without touching the boxes, like reading Braille. She kept all of them, every one. He found the box without asking for it, maybe because it was near the front, maybe because after a lifetime of building things, his hands knew how to find load-bearing elements. The label said Morella V. 1973. He stood with it in his hands for a long moment. Jarell left him there, because some rooms a person needs to be alone in. She went downstairs and sat by the wood stove that Fatu had helped her drag in 2 days ago, and which threw real heat into the front room for the first time in 14 years. She listened to the house around her, the tick of the walls, the settling, the small sounds of an old structure that had been through worse than this and was still standing. After a long while, she heard him on the stairs. He came into the front room and sat in the other chair, the one she'd found in the back bedroom with a broken leg that she'd fixed in an afternoon with a dowel and some glue and the small satisfaction of a thing that had been broken and now was not. He was holding the box against his chest. He didn't speak for a long time. "I want to help," he said finally. She waited. "Not buy it, not put my name on it, just help." He looked around the room, the wood stove, the kerosene lamp, the plaster gone from the walls, but the bones of the place solid and present. "What do you want it to be?" She had been turning this over for days without saying it, and now it came easy. What she had, Jarell said, what Opaline had, but different, not hidden, not in the dark with the window painted black. She looked at him. "There are kids aging out of the system in this county every year with 2 bags and a list of shelters. I was one of them less than 2 weeks ago. There's no place for them. There is no door." She looked at him. "I want to keep the door open. That's the only rule. Whatever else, the door stays open." Vrel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need," he said, "and I'll make sure you have it." Fatu came up the hill the next morning with a folder under her arm and Parveen behind her with a briefcase, and between them they sat at Opaline's kitchen table and built the legal structure of something that had never existed quite like this before, a non-profit, a board, adults who answered for it. "You run it," Fetu said, "but you don't carry it alone." She looked at Jarrell across the table. "Opaline carried it alone for 60 years, and this town let her. We are not doing that to you." Parveen filed the paperwork. Dorcas took on the legal compliance because she had spent 31 years in a hospital and knew her way around institutional paperwork in a way that made Parveen visibly relieved. Vrel put in the money to start. No name on anything, just money doing what money could do when it was pointed at something right. And Dex Prouty called on a Wednesday morning from the Harwick County Nursing Facility because Fetu had tracked down the number and called him first, and his voice on the phone was frail, but his knowledge of that house's electrical system was complete and precise and unhesitating. "I wired that house 4 times over 40 years, he said, "charged her cost of materials and not a penny more. She never asked me to keep her secret. I just did." A pause, the long pause of someone breathing carefully around a reduced lung capacity. "I always thought someone would come eventually." She said the house would find the next one. "It did," Jorel said. Another pause. "I know," he said. "Fetu told me." He paused again. "I'm glad." He walked her through the full electrical layout over the phone while she sat on the floor of the back hall with a notepad writing down every junction, every switch, every spot he'd rerouted around something old and replaced with something honest, the inherited map of every decision he'd made in that house across 4 decades. She thanked him. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank her. I was just the electrician." He paused. She was the one who kept the light on. Winter came down over Harwick County. The work went on. Vrel's crew put the new roof on in November. Proper slates, properly set, the steep pitch, draining clean. They showed up early and left late and ate lunch in the kitchen from thermoses because the kitchen was warm and because Jorel noticed they were not the kind of men who needed to be told twice that a place deserved care. The porch got rebuilt. The load-bearing issue on the east side was addressed. The electrical was run new from the panel up, following Dex's map by a licensed electrician who charged real money and then quietly called Parveen and cut the invoice by 40% and said not to mention it. And in the evenings after the crew was gone, Jorel worked alone. She worked the way Hascombe had taught her, slow, careful, hands before eyes, every door off its hinges laid across sawhorses, read with the plane until it was right, every window frame stripped back to honest wood and built back up, every stair tread checked for give and sound, and shimmied where it needed it. The folding rule went with her through the house, the way it had gone through 6 placements, not just as a measuring tool, as the thing she held when she needed to remember whose hand she was working in the tradition of. Rufford Hascombe, who had sat in that turret room at the end of his life and left a tool behind for someone he'd never meet. She thought about that a lot through the winter. How the things we leave shape the people we never know. How a person can build something, not a building, not a room, just a gesture, just a decision, and have it travel forward through years in strangers' hands and land exactly where it needed to land without any deliberate navigation. The turret window got new glass in December, clear glass not painted, and the first night she left the lamp burning in it, she went out to the gate and stood in the cold and looked up. The light was warm and steady. Some people in town had been crossing the street from a dark window for 14 years. Now there was a warm one at the top of the hill, and some of them started to find reasons to come up. They came on a Sunday in May, the ones who could. Fetu had spent 3 months tracking them down. working from the ledger names, letters to old addresses, phone calls to numbers that might or might not still be good. She wasn't one for explaining how she found things. She was one for finding them. 31 of them came back, most of them gray-haired, some with their own adult children in tow, some alone, all of them standing at the broken gate, which Jarrell had left broken on purpose because every one of them needed to stand at that gate first and looking up at the house with the expression of people revisiting the coordinates of something that happened to them when they were young and unprotected and did not know yet how it would turn out. Jarrell let them in. She brought the boxes down, all of them, laid out on the long kitchen table in order so each person could walk the length of it and find their own name and year. And they did. An old man found his box and opened it and took out a photograph of himself at 9 years old, gap-toothed and wild-haired, standing in front of the kitchen window. He looked at it for a long time. Then he showed it to the adult daughter standing beside him, who had always wondered about the year her father never discussed, and she looked at it and looked at him and took his hand. A woman in her 70s found a pressed leaf and a birthday card and a report card with a note in Opaline's hand, good at math and absolutely furious about it, and she laughed the way people laugh when someone dead has known them perfectly and written it down. 2 women found their boxes at the same moment, the same year 1974, and looked at each other and recognized something in the other's face and stood holding their boxes and talking in voices too low for anyone else to hear. They exchanged phone numbers before they left. Jarrell moved through the room slowly. She watched. She carried things when they needed to be carried. She answered questions when they were asked. She stayed at the edge of things because the room didn't need her at the center. This was Opaline's work still completing itself. Vrel came late. He came alone. He stood for a while in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at the people and the boxes and the growth chart on the door frame that was full of names in small horizontal lines running back 70 years. Then he came in. He found his mother's box. He held it. He cleared his throat, once the way people clear their throats when they are about to say something in public that they have never said in private. My mother spent the winter of 1973 in this house, he said. He said it to the room, not performing it, just saying it the way you finally say the thing you have been carrying, because the carrying has become heavier than the saying. She was 17 and she was alone, and she came here and someone opened the door. He looked at the box in his hands. I spent 50 years building things because I thought I owed a debt I couldn't name. I understand it now. He looked up. She is safe now. She has always been safe, and I'm done being ashamed of where I come from. The room was quiet, and then the man who had said 1971 put his hand on Vrel's shoulder for one brief second, the kind of touch that doesn't need explanation. They ate in the kitchen, all of them, at the long table that Opaline had built to feed many, which was doing exactly that for the first time in 14 years. Jarrell stood in the doorway and looked at the table full of people who had all once been children. Nobody wanted who had grown up and grown old and come back to the one place that had known what to do with them. She thought Opaline should have seen this, and then maybe she does, in the only way that counts. He came in October, almost exactly 1 year from the day she'd bought the house. Dorcas brought him up in her car, 16 years old, sharp shoulders, watchful eyes, garbage bag of clothes on his lap, and a quality of stillness that Jarrell recognized from the inside as not stillness at all, but the constant low-level vigilance of a kid who had learned that safe was a trick people played on you right before things got worse. He stood at the broken gate, looked up at the turret window. The lamp was lit. This the haunted house. That's what they used to call it, Jorel said. What do they call it now? Don't know yet. It's still figuring that out. He looked at the gate, at the house, at Jorel. Somebody said there's a place to stay. There is. You make your own bed. You do your own dishes. She met his eyes. The door stays open. That's the whole deal. What's the catch? No catch. She stepped back toward the path. Somebody left this place open for me, so I keep it open. You'll spend a while waiting for it to turn into something worse. It won't. That part you just have to live here long enough to find out. He looked at her for a long time with the exact expression she had worn in 6 foster homes and 2 group placements and 1 county auction room. The expression of someone waiting for the fine print, which was fine. She knew how to wait. He picked up his bag and came through the gate. She got him settled in the back bedroom, the one where the roof had let the sky in before she'd fixed it dry now, warm, painted the soft, warm white that Dorcas had remembered from 1966 and insisted on exactly. Clean sheets, a window that showed the town below and the hills beyond, and the late October sky going amber at the edges. She left him alone because she remembered what it felt like, that first night somewhere that might be safe, the way you couldn't simply trust it, the way you had to lie in the dark and let the sounds of the place become familiar and let the walls just be walls before your body would believe any of it. Some things you couldn't tell a person. They had to find it out in the particular silence of their own first morning. In the morning, she found him in the 2nd floor hallway, standing at the door frame, looking at the marks. Who are all these people? He said. Everyone who ever lived here, Jorel said, going back about 70 years. He ran his thumb over a faded line near the middle of the frame, a name she couldn't read from where she stood, a date in the 60s. He looked at the frame for a long time. Where's yours? He said. She stopped. She had measured hundreds of other people's marks against that frame over the past year. She had helped a man in his 60s find his from 1971 and watched him stand there, shaking. She had watched Dorcas put her hand on the mark she'd made as a teenager and stand very still for a long time. She had never put her own. She went to the kitchen and got the pencil that lived on the windowsill for exactly this. Came back, stood with her back against the doorframe. Mark it, she said. He took the pencil, drew the line, wrote the date. She stepped away and looked at it. Her mark, on the frame, among all the others, above some, below some, in the middle of 70 years of people who had stood here and been here and left something of themselves on a door frame in a house at the top of a hill. The boy looked at her mark, then at all the others. Something in his shoulders came down a fraction of an inch, just a fraction. But she saw it. She knew what it was. He was not yet close to believing. He belonged on a wall full of names. But the mark was there, in his own hand, and every single person on that frame had started in exactly that spot. That night, Jorel walked the house before bed the way she always did now, front to back, checking the stove, checking the windows, the sounds of the house settling into itself familiar, now the grammar of a place that had been empty and was empty no longer. She climbed to the turret room last, stood at the window where Opaline had sat in the dark for so many years, with the paint sealing the glass against the world. The paint was long gone. The glass was clear. Below the town lay in its small lights, the diner on Millard, the freight rail, the old industrial block where second-grade hardware would open again tomorrow morning with Fetu behind the counter and the brass bell on the spring above the door. Up here one more light, steady and warm, visible from Route 9, from the bottom of Kettle Rise, from anywhere in the lower part of town where you might look up at a hill at night and see a window lit and understand without being told that someone was there. She held the folding rule in her palm for a moment, felt the brass warm up. R. H. Rufford, her Hascomb. Give it to whoever needs steady hands. She set it on the writing desk. Then she trimmed the wick. She left the lamp burning, the way she would leave it tomorrow and the night after, and for as long as there was a house to burn it in, because someone had left a light on for her once, before she knew her name was on the list. She'd spent her whole life believing that home was a thing other people had, a door that opened for everyone except her. It had taken a dead woman and a sealed room and a folding rule with someone else's initials to show her otherwise. She looked at the light in the window. She looked at the town below. Home isn't the place that keeps you. It's the place you decide to keep. She was 18 years old. She had spent $15, and it was the best $15 she would ever spend. Not because of what she found inside that house, because of what the house and the woman who had given her whole life to it had asked her to become. The window glowed gold over the town. Jorel went to bed. Have you ever built something quietly without credit, without anyone knowing that you hoped would still be standing long after you were gone? Leave it in the comments. We read every one.